All right. Well, good morning, everybody. I actually have the privilege of being here with a friend of mine, a colleague, and among other things, a leader in the Wesleyan Church, Santis Beatty. And I'll give him a chance to introduce himself here in a minute. But Santis, he wears a few hats in the Wesleyan Church. We'll give him a shot to explain to us what they are. But Santis, why don't you introduce yourself? This is the people at North Branch Wesleyan Church. Just a little over an hour north of you guys, and we'd love to hear from you and how things are going. But tell us a little about yourself and what you do in regards to the Wesleyan Church, and specifically at your church now.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jason. So Jason and I go way back. He probably is not going to tell you that, but we have a rich history of youth ministry and serving on staff together. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity just to connect with the North Branch family. Thank you for the many ways you've been so generous and supportive over the years at Mosaic. We really, really appreciate you. So just a little bit about me. So I am currently the campus pastor at Mosaic Midtown Church in Detroit. I also serve as the multi-ethnic multiplication catalyst for the Wesleyan Church. And I serve under Ed Love and that division on multiplication. Prior to that, I was the director of multi-ethnic ministries for the Wesleyan Church for about 5.5 years. I just stepped into my role at Mosaic in November of this past year. So I wear the full-time hat at the church and the equivalent of 1 day a week at the Wesleyan Church headquarters. So I'm housed in the CMAD, Church Multiplication and Discipleship Division under Dr. Anita Eastlak. And so that's kind of the role. But prior to that, I was in ministry as a youth pastor, served many years. I've also been an entrepreneur, have a nonprofit, and some other things. First started out, my first pastorate was actually kind of at a small liberal arts college in North Carolina. And so I did that with young adult students. That's actually when I met my wife. And so married, have 6 kids, 3 at home. And so just a fun time right now during all this happening with COVID-19, all of us up in the house together. So as you can imagine, a lot of fun doing homework and
Yes.
all that good stuff. So yeah, a little bit about me.
Well, great. Tell us quickly about your move. You've now relocated to Detroit, and you were working solely at the Wesleyan headquarters per se, and you were in North Carolina, and then you moved to Detroit. Tell us a touch about that.
Yeah, so like I said, I was on staff at the Wesleyan Church headquarters full time since 2014. And I lived in Indianapolis for a couple years when there was the vote at General Conference in 2016. We were allowed to work remotely in North Carolina, which is where my wife and I are both from. Her family's there, my family's there. And so we were there for about 3.5 years. About January of 2019, I started feeling this nudge that a change was coming, and it usually happens about a year out for me. And I started kind of this process of grieving, this process of searching and discerning, not recognizing or realizing that Pastor Mick was feeling some of the same stuff and trying to navigate those waters of, what's God saying? How do I move forward and some of that? And so over the course of 2019, began to kind of assemble folks that really pray for us and just kind of do life with us. And had no idea that Pastor Mick was going to accept the role as lead pastor at Kentwood Community Church. But when that domino fell, everything started to make sense. And because I was wrestling with this tension of, do I get back into local church ministry at full time? Do I do parachurch? Do I start my own organization? I had all these things that were swirling, but the local church felt like the pull, but I didn't know or felt like there was any church that fit us, that fit me. And so whenever Pastor Mick made that decision in August, I was literally at KCC preaching the last Sunday in August, and find out the week after that he had accepted that role. that's when the pieces started to fall into place. And I literally, probably the best way for me to describe it is whenever I heard the news, it was almost like if you can imagine what Elizabeth experienced when Mary called for her and John jumped in her womb. Like there was literally a physical experience that I had when I heard the news. I couldn't mentally wrap my hands around it yet, but spiritually I knew something was happening and something good was about to unfold. And so when he and I started talking, a lot of the pieces began to line up. But then, I got to go back and tell my wife, right? I got to go back and talk to my kids about this, and my family, my church family, like, you're leaving again, right? Like, you're leaving us in North Carolina to go back to Michigan, because we were at Kentwood for about 4 years, which is where I met Jason, from 2010 to 2014. And so from early September to November was this discernment process. And you normally have, anywhere from 6 months to a year for a pastoral transition. And we did it in a matter of months. And so it's, looking back on it now, God's hand was all over it. We know Detroit and Mosaic is uniquely wired the way we are. And so it's been a smooth transition from a church standpoint, because of all the things that God was orchestrating over time. The more difficult part, of course, is the family. Like, we had to find a home. We had to find schools for the kids. We had to do all those things. Those things were way more complicated than the church part of it. And what Pastor Mick has decided to do, which was just really wise on his part, because he didn't know how long it was going to take and who God was going to send when he first made that decision. So he has stayed on to preach once a month. So he comes in once a month to preach. He's with us on Tuesdays for our staff meetings. I lead the day-to-day operations of the church, but he still speaks into some of those dynamics, specifically fundraising and things of that nature, because that's more his wheelhouse than mine. And so we've had to navigate this season of us both being a part of Mosaic, me leading it, but him still sticking around and helping navigate the transition relationally, because I'm totally new to the church. I only knew a few of the people who went to Mosaic. And so that's been a very, God orchestrated transition in terms of him staying on at some level and then slowly pulling back, so that he can spend most of his time and energy at Kentwood. But we consider ourselves a campus mainly because of our relationship, nothing related to name, nothing related to budget or any of those kind of things. It's mainly because of we have a very similar vision, mission, and just DNA as a multi-ethnic church. So that's been a blessing. And I look back on it now and I'm like, man, had he not done that, it would have probably been a lot rougher coming in because of how quick everything went down. And so it was very wise on his part to do that. And it's very unique. Like, you don't see very many churches where this happens and it works, because there are a lot of competing egos and, who's going to get the credit for that? This is my decision or your decision. But for whatever reason, it's worked for us, and we'll probably write about it someday. But it's just been a very smooth transition, and we're really thankful for that.
That's great. Thank you for that. I can identify with you on that in some regards. It would be tough to say, all right, this is going to work smoothly, make that transition. And it'd be tough for Pastor Mick to say, hey, I've been on here and now I'm going to step away and I'm going to allow for this to be run by somebody else. So we'll be praying for you guys in that regard as well, because I'm sure that's a great thing between you two, but I'm sure there's some challenges with it. One thing that we'd love to ask is, as a church that's located near you geographically, different from you, we're in a rural location, you're in more of an urban location. Right now, a curious thing for a lot of people would be, what is life like in Detroit currently, in your surrounding area for your congregants, for your church, especially in terms of COVID-19. We're facing this as a world, as a nation, and we're in the same state. We're in this together, they say, but we'd love to know how that's going for you guys. And at the end of this, we'd like to know how we can pray for you in regards to the same thing. So tell us what it's like for you right now where you are?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. Yeah, it's rough. I mean, just to be very blunt and honest, you know, there are a lot of challenges and needs of our city and our people long before COVID-19 hit. I mean, the reality of poverty, of unemployment, job situations, education challenges, um, healthcare, you know, people getting the things that they need. So there are all these kinds of challenges that were there long before COVID-19. And I think this season has kind of increased some of those challenges, some of those needs, and the fact that you can't get to people physically kind of intensifies the challenge, because we're a very relational church and very engaged, like meeting people where they are, like where the rubber hits the road. And so this has forced us to have to rethink how we do ministry. But I would say to you, to meet the spiritual needs and the physical need, we enjoy partnerships with Gleaners, which is a food bank, partnerships with our with Mariners, which is a recovery rehabilitation center that we have partnered with over the years. St. Pat's, which is a senior center that we partner with. So trying to rethink those relationships to meet those needs. Pastor Michael Newton, who's our assistant pastor, who's over outreach and our youth ministry, has been like on the ground from day one, trying to help with food, whether it be making food runs with people in terms of them riding in our van, helping them get to grocery stores, to boxes of food that we're bringing in, like I said, with Gleaners. Also, KCC has helped us in that regard. There have been food distribution times that we've had over the last several weeks where we've been able to get food to people, as well as supplies, things like diapers and wipes and toiletries and all those kinds of things. And so it's been really huge. I think one of the difficult parts is watching, you know, the fact that more and more people are getting sick.
Okay.
And we've only had one death in our church family, and that was last week. 82-year-old mother of our church passed away, and the family had to make decisions about her through FaceTime. I mean, that tells you this is unprecedented times, right? Like that they had to say goodbye through FaceTime. That tells you a lot about the situation we're in. We had some youth in our youth group lost their father on this weekend, and so we're experiencing not only the sickness, but we're experiencing the grief and the loss through death. And so it's hard to know how to care for people in these kinds of seasons, but we're trying to do our best. And we've had a lot of churches that have jumped in to try to help. And so we've gotten boxes of supplies from churches in Texas, and we're Horizons, which is right outside of Plano. And so we're grateful for those contributions, but still trying to meet those needs, address those concerns, but people are still coming to Jesus, right? Like people are still making decisions. So ministry still goes forward. We don't stop ministry because of all this is happening. We're trying to keep our people safe. We've had several leaders in our church get sick, their whole family, you know, when one gets sick, the whole household is sick. And so trying to help navigate some of that has been tough. But still trying to be wise and discerning in how we serve people. And keep our people safe, but at the same time, be bold and courageous. So it's that tension of, you know, do we stick our head in the sand and wait for this to blow over? We just can't do that. Like, that's just not who we are. But at the same time, we want to be sensitive to what is lawful to do and also what is safe to do. And so that's the tension we're living in. And it's hard when you're seeing people die all around you. We've had multiple deaths that we knew about before we've seen our own at our church family. So we haven't had to do a funeral yet. We haven't had to do a virtual funeral, thankfully, but we know churches who have in our surrounding areas. So it's really tough.
Wow. You had mentioned before that Mosaic is kind of in a unique situation, kind of a unique DNA to the church. A question that I have for you too is then, with COVID-19, coronavirus swirling around, how has this affected Mosaic in terms of how you do things? Has this changed your outlook on anything? Has it changed any of your approach in terms of ministry to people? How has it changed things for you guys, other than, we're online for services and things like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's to try to get our DNA into virtual stuff has been hard, but we found some things that are working. So one, like we're a church that I don't want to say we weren't tech savvy, but we were not all over social media. Our website was, dated, and so we knew those things when I came in. Those were kind of infrastructure things that I knew I needed to do, because that's probably a little bit more of my wheelhouse than was for Pastor Mick. And so we had already started that process, and revamping our website, social media stuff. And so this hits like right in the middle of that. And so the good thing is that we were able to pivot pretty well. And it didn't hurt that I've spent, the last 5.5 years at headquarters doing a lot of Zoom meetings, a lot of webinars. Like this is the world I've been able to be in for the last 5.5 years. And so it was just a matter of shifting it to a church context. And so that was a pivot we had to make, making all of our gatherings available online for Facebook, YouTube, and for Zoom. The things that we tweaked were we originally we were just showing or just doing a Facebook Live and not having discussions afterwards. And we shifted really quickly because we recognize our people need to talk. Our people, we call it a virtual Mosaic lobby, right? Where they can have conversations. And almost everything we do at the church involves food. It's part of just the challenge of doing multi-ethnic ministry is a lot of it is around the table, right? And so since we don't have the table fellowship and the opportunity to connect with people over food, we've created virtual spaces for that, where people can interact and do those kinds of things. So after the service, every Sunday, we have about 45 minutes where we engage around the message, where then we spend about 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes, where people can just connect with each other, no agenda, just, connecting. We also have time after every Bible study on Tuesday, after every youth group session, after every recovery session on Thursday, to engage. And we've had anywhere from, 20 to I think we've been upward of 40 on some of those sessions of people who are on interacting. So that's been a blessing. I think the other piece that we didn't have in place before is we've instituted care groups. So that was something that existed in other churches I've been a part of, whether it was the deacons who did it or pastors who did it. But we've divided out our church into groups of 10 to 15 and assigned a care leader who connects with that group individually and sometimes even as a group. It's almost like a small group that meets virtually and connects with them just to kind of know where people are, what they need. And we recognize that we haven't been able to reach everybody. Like we've made that attempt. And so those are some of the things that we're trying to shore up now. Like who are the people that have fallen through the cracks that we haven't been able to connect with either by phone or email or what have you. And you always have that because sometimes people submit their info and sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
Particularly in our community where, phone numbers change, addresses change, people are a little bit more transient than they are in some other spaces. So that's been one of the more difficult things. And then the other reality is like trying to meet the needs of students and children has been even more difficult. But our children's pastor, Pastor Maggie, has things that we have like a children's service that happens at 3:00 on Sunday afternoons. And then there are books that she reads throughout the week as kind of a late night bedtime story. And then as I said before, Pastor Michael does some things on Wednesday nights. They have like a they create almost like a youth group experience where there are games and fun at the beginning, there's a message in the middle, and then there's kind of conversation at the end. And so trying to navigate all those spaces has been really, really important. And we still see new people coming in. The other cool thing I'll say to end is there are a lot of people who were a part of Mosaic who've moved away for jobs or ministry or whatever. And what's really cool about this is that they can now plug in, right? So some of those individuals are now in our services. They're a part of the discussions. We have a ministry called Freedom. We have a Freedom team that does Freedom sessions. And so we have leaders who are in other parts of the world that are now a part of those Freedom sessions because they can do so virtually when they couldn't do so physically. So there's some good things that are coming out of it that we're trying to leverage. And but then there are those difficult parts that we just have to figure out. And that's not always easy, but God's given us the grace to do so. And we still see people responding to the gospel. So
definitely. It's been really cool, the church collectively, not just sticking our head in the sand, like you've said, and pressing onward and saying, how are we still going to reach the world? Well, that's great that you guys are doing what you're doing. And really kind of lastly, as a sister church in Detroit, again, not very far from each other, I just would like to know, how can our congregants, how can North Branch Wesleyan Church be praying for Mosaic, whether that's some specific things or some general things? As a sister church, how would you ask for prayer for Mosaic?
Yeah, thank you. I think number one would be that we would, in this season, see people's needs met physically. Like there's, it's just really difficult to hear the stories of people who are battling with the sickness, who may not have the resources or insurance or things of that nature. So just praying that we would be able to help in that regard. Sometimes that's, of course, connecting them with an agency that can meet some of those needs. Sometimes it's financially trying to help step in and provide some things. So just meeting some of those physical needs, health, and sometimes just awareness. Like sometimes people just don't know. Sometimes it's education. That would be the first thing. I think secondly, just praying for our leaders right now. We're a church that has fully embraced the idea of you can do it, we can help. And so we want to invert church where the expression of who we are is to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. And so we want to embody that in every way. So we don't want people to feel like they have to come to us. We want them to understand that we are to equip them to go out to others. And so as people are doing that, whether it be through fresh expressions, whether that be through, micro churches, house churches, those kind of things, I really am praying for an unleashing of our people to go and be the church, right? More of a go and be and less of a come and see. And so we believe that if that happens well, a lot of the people who are in our community, they're hearing the gospel, we're better understanding what the needs are. Because there's nothing worse than like trying to help people, but you don't know what they need, right? Yeah. Like just yesterday, we were having this conversation. So this father died and has 11 children, and he died. And so, of course, for us, like we're asking the question, we don't just go in there and start like giving food or, whatever. Like we need to go in there and figure out what's really happening as much as they will allow us in this time of grief so that we can help, right, in the way that they need it. And we don't want to waste their time or waste resources. We need to understand. So as people are going out, as they're loving people, as they're serving, we want to recognize what are the needs, how do we address them, and how do we be the hands and feet of Jesus, right? So that's a big piece. I think the third one is definitely finances. I think every church is wrestling with that, like how do we meet these needs without resources, right? And so from a resource standpoint, we're the kind of church where, if if we're honest, like a lot of our folks either are low income or no income, right? And so to expect tithes and offerings to pay for everything, when that's your reality, is probably unrealistic. And so we have to find other creative ways of creating revenue streams or fundraising, to meet the demand of needs in our community. And so that's always a prayer request. And God has been faithful. You know, people like your church and other churches that have given towards this good work, has been essential to us not only surviving but thriving. And so we never forget how important that is, and we always ask for that prayer that God would open up those doors. The other thing that we're really trying to figure out right now is, we have a lot of space in our basement, and we're really praying through how to utilize that, right? Because we're in Midtown. This is like prime real estate, right? But we have the basement that is the length of the church, and we're praying that God would help us to know how to utilize that to do kingdom work, right? And we don't want to just make it like a fellowship hall and classrooms, right? Like that, at some level that's great, but at another level it's like, you know, it would sit empty for much of the week. Yeah. And so we're really praying through how to utilize that basement for the glory of God, that it might be something that's used by the community every day, something where the gospel is shared, needs are met, relationships are built. And so that's a big prayer request for us right now as we discern that. And of course that includes vision, partnerships, resources, all those kind of things. But we really believe, we don't want to jump too quickly on that. We want to be prayerful about that, and let God guide us. So that's another piece. And then we're trying to transition the church in this new season, and discipleship is at the core. Disciple making is at the core of what we do. And so right now we're in a process of shifting culture, to becoming more of a disciple making church. And so just be praying for us as we lay all that out with our team and our congregants. So.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. And as one more question, I guess, as somebody that's known you for a while and knowing that you and your family transitioned from the North Carolina area to where you are now, what about prayer for your family? I know your kids are in a new situation, new school, if we were going to school, you and your wife relocating. How about prayers for the Beatty family? How can we do that?
Yeah, so pray that my wife and I stay sane through all of this. It's probably the big prayer. But seriously, I think one big prayer is, my wife was on staff at our church in North Carolina. She was on staff at our church in Indiana. She was, of course, on staff at our church in Grand Rapids at Kentwood. And so in this season, as we've moved here, because everything happened so quickly, she has not made the decision yet about going back into the workforce. And we're really praying through whether that will be in a ministry context, a parachurch organization, or nonprofit, which is what she did before she started ministry. God has always said to me, like, whenever you make these kind of moves, your wife's ministry is just as important as yours. And so we're really being prayerful about what that looks like for her. Right now, it makes sense for her to be home and to be with our kids, because we have one child who hasn't entered school yet. And so it made sense for these first few months. And now that COVID-19 is hit, it makes a whole lot of sense that she's not working. And we've been blessed to be able to do that for a season. But really praying for that, for that door to open and that clarity to come, that she can move into that space and do the kind of work she feels called to, that is life-giving to her. And so that's really a prayer request. She said to me a long time ago, I'm not a stay-at-home mom. And so she said, I'll do it for a season, but that is not the permanent role for me. And so like really praying for that. And I think also, you know, just our kids transitioning, they haven't missed a beat. Their schools are amazing. Their teachers are incredible. They're loving it, but they're also missing home. You know, in North Carolina, they're missing family. And so that they make good friends, that that life here is one that they're not, they don't look back on this and say, man, I hate that we moved to Detroit. Like that this is life-giving and, you know, inspiring to them. That's definitely a prayer request for us right now.
Well, thank you. Once again, Santee Beatty here, pastor at Mosaic Midtown Church now, just spending a few minutes with us, letting us know how things are going for them in Detroit and at our sister church there. Santee, we thank you so much for your time, and we will be praying for you, and we'll be sharing this with our congregation. Thank you very much, and I can let you go now.
Yeah, thank you, man. Thanks for having us.
Thanks a lot.